Hello and welcome to the Other Kind of Doctor podcast. My name is Gemma.
And my name is Gaia, and we are both on the journey of gaining a PhD.
A quick disclaimer before we start. We are in fact the academic kind of doctors.
Well, nearly doctors.
Yes, nearly doctors. But we're not your medical kind of doctors.
So if you do need medical attention, please contact your GP.
Now, let's get on with the episode.
Hello!
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Other Kind of Doctor podcast.
What are we talking about today?
We are talking about, we've actually got a really exciting guest, our first guest, Hannah Jones, who's a fellow PhD student on, and we're going to be talking about navigating your PhD as someone who is neurodivergent.
Yes.
Just a quick disclaimer before we start. I accidentally got my words muddled up briefly in this episode. I used the word neurodiverse rather than neurodivergent, and Guy is going to give us a quick definition about what those terms mean.
The term neurodivergent, which is what Gemma should have used, refers to individuals with conditions such as ADHD, autism, and is used as the opposite of the term neurotypical. But the term neurodiverse is generally used to describe a group of individuals who are neurodivergent, although some sources also report the term as representing the whole spectrum of diversity, so also including neurotypical individuals.
Okay, I hope that clears everything up. But without further ado, let's move on with the episode. Hello.
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 So today we are joined with lovely Hannah Jones. She is a fellow PhD student and we're going to be discussing navigating a PhD with neurodiversity.
Woohoo!
Woo! We've been really excited to have Hannah on as our first official guest.
Yay!
Yay! How do you feel about being our first guest, Hannah? No pressure.
I mean, Courtney asked me and I was like, okay.
Oh, you didn't jump and scream when she asked.
I didn't give it much thought. I was like, yeah,
Wow.
I can do it. Well, she was like, you seem up for it. And I'm like, yeah. I mean, I can do anything.
We think you're really well versed on this topic and we think you're going to be really interesting. And
I'm just talkative, that's what you mean.
Yeah, basically.
That is exactly what we mean.
That's exactly what we mean.
I've already given you enough life stories.
Yeah.
So, first question. Just tell us a bit about your PhD. Oh, this sounds like a PhD interview.
Yeah, it's not a PhD interview, but bear in mind...
what's your PhD about?
What
are you
subject,
doing?
Yeah, what subject area you're in. Like, tell us a bit about you. And things
Yeah,
like that.
So obviously psychology. I'm just going to start with that.
She's another one of us, psychology.
Yes. And I'm in my first year. And I'm working with Saloni Krishnan and Kyle Jasmine and also Kathy Manning of Reading, and mine's centred around reading research. But specifically we want to look at, you have two children in a class, both of the same profile, like they have the same disability, the same language profile. For whatever reasons, their trajectories should be exactly the same. They should end up in the exact same place. But obviously, as we know, that doesn't happen. One ends up loving reading and for some reason keeps trying to read, and the other doesn't want to even look at books. So we're kind of coming up with a way to test that without actually using questionnaires, because currently there's questionnaires which is like, do you like reading? 1 to 9. And obviously, if anyone's read Amrita's paper, which if you have not...
Shout out to Amrita.
Very good paper. It doesn't predict whether you're going to wait to read. So we're really interested in that department, whether we can expand on that and whether we can separate ability from effort. And we don't mean effort as in like something you can control. It's more how we evaluate effort and reward. So like, am I willing to run for a piece of chocolate? Now,
Absolutely
depending on
not.
how much you like that chocolate.
Depends if it's dairy milk or a Galaxy, really.
I wouldn't run for any reason, to be
I
honest.
wouldn't run for a Galaxy chocolate bar.
Yeah, and imagine we then tailored that running ability. So we know that you averagely run 5 minutes, right? You can run 5 minutes, no sweat, you're fine with it. You don't want to run at all, so it's 0. That's your baseline, right?
Yes.
And then imagine I knew that that's your ability. So I've tailored it to your ability, and then I say, hey, if you run 10 minutes, which I know is above your limit, I will give you 2 pieces of chocolate. But if you run 15, I'll give you 3. So that's what we're altering. But it's tailored to your ability, so that kind of cancels it out the equation.
Nice. Oh, it's really interesting.
I wonder if you could tell us why you wanted to pursue a PhD. So your PhD topic sounds so interesting, and obviously you're in your first year, so kind of like why you wanted to be a PhD student, I guess.
Yeah, I think my destination is a bit like funny because obviously this subject is different from what I applied for originally. Because I originally had an idea to center my PhD around special interest in reading and seeing if we can use special interest to kind of a strength-based approach to like improving reading and motivation. And we've obviously gone very far away from that. And that was basically because there was all like, actually, should we want to use, like, should we categorise special interests? How would we apply it? And then it's like,
fair enough.
A lot of these are more like people who work with kids naturally start to do this, but obviously if you don't work with kids, you don't naturally start to do this. And then we were like, oh, that's going to require different research. And then Saloni presented this idea, and I was like, oh my god, that's so cool. Because also we use like computational modelling.
Yeah.
Which is awesome, though very complicated, and I am not excited.
So did you do a master's or did you go straight from undergrad?
So I did undergrad, and while I was in there, I started to apply my final year to PhD programs, and that was based on like other people's advice.
Did you always want to do a PhD?
I wanted to do research, so I've always been one of those people that's been like research, and if I have to do teaching, I'll do a bit of teaching. Like one of those people that it's like, I just want to do research and I just want to, I guess, help in a way, because like I think a lot of people, like, we're all like bound by our like experiences, aren't we? So like I came from like one of those things where like I was diagnosed by an educational psychologist when I was little, and I remember in my educational psychology report my parents told me this repeatedly, that it said she'll go to university, she can with the right support. My parents did not believe. But to be fair, that's because they didn't think I achieved GCSEs, right? So then I think back to that and you think, well, that's down to all the support and mostly all the research. And also I'm a person that likes to learn.
Yeah.
As I said, I've always been one of those people where it's like, what can I do to improve myself? And my brothers hate me because they're the type of people that wouldn't be like that. They would, like, one of them is like, I'm ready to retire now, and it's like, you're 2 years older than me, why are you ready to retire? But he's like, no, I'm ready to retire. And the other one's like, no, I don't want to do psychology anymore, because he did psychology undergraduates and he did a master in clinical, and he literally said, I've discovered I don't like people.
Well, that's a long way to find out that you don't like people.
To be fair, he does like people. I think he definitely has traits of autism that he just doesn't know he has, and he's just like, and then he was like, I want money, and I was like, that's not how you get it.
You're certainly not going to get it as a PhD student.
No.
So that's now he's a car insurance person, so he does car rentals.
Good for him, I guess.
Hey, he's getting a house. They just put an
Good
offer
for
on a
him,
house.
then.
So you kind of hinted towards it just there, Hannah, but I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your neurodiversity and, you know, what, maybe if you've got a diagnosis and your experiences so far.
Yeah, like that's a very complicated question, as in like, because like if we're going like from when I was a child, we've always known. So the moment I went into nursery, the teacher actually told my mum something's different about her. That's the first thing she literally said. She like, something is definitely off. I don't think she used the word different. I think it was like, something is definitely off with your child. Because I was the type of person to like play alone, scream at the desks, clutch onto my mum as she tried to pry me off her.
Sorry, did you say scream at desks?
Scream under desks.
Oh, okay.
Crawl under the desk and then scream for your life.
I thought you meant at desks.
No. Though that does not seem far from what I would do, to be fair. It was like one of those things. So I had like loads of little quirks, and it took years and years and years of like loads of educational psychologists. That's most of what I remember in my childhood, of just like being other support, being out of class. So that was like loads and loads. And the educational finally diagnosed me with DLD, so that's developmental language disorder. Whoop whoop. Dyslexia, which obviously struggle with reading. Dyspraxia, which is that my fine motor skills aren't very good. And that includes my eyes, funny enough. People don't know that.
How does that work?
So you have fine little muscles in your eyes, and if you have dyspraxia, some people actually notice that their eyes vibrate slightly.
Oh.
So most eye doctors won't pick up on it, but if you go to a specialist eye doctor, they do.
Interesting. Can you feel it?
No, obviously.
Oh, so
But like,
sorry.
it's why sometimes like words move. You know, like Percy Jackson always says the words move. That's not dyslexia. That's dyspraxia.
Wow, you should tell them that.
You should
I
write
know.
to
Send them a
Percy
strongly worded
Jackson.
email.
It's one of those things where a lot of people who have dyslexia don't even know though, because actually they have dyspraxia as well, because they're so comorbid. And then I also was diagnosed with hypermobility with double joints. So I can do that with my finger. Everyone really hates
She's
it.
doing a
Listeners,
thing with her thumb.
she's like clicking her thumb.
I can like dislocate it on and off. It like
Please.
jumps out of the thing. People
Not
find
right
it
now.
disgusting.
Let's
and I'm
not
just
do
like,
it right now.
And I'm just like, it's not that disgusting.
There's a
it's
time
just
and
a normal
place.
time. When is the time? When is the
I
place?
am not sure.
No. Alone. Nowhere should see me. Then I was also diagnosed with low working memory, which, funny enough, someone said to me, "Is that a diagnosis?" And I said, "Yes, it is." Literally, when I did a neuroplasticity assessment when I was getting diagnosed later on in life in university for ADHD. And they found that actually my working memory for like visual is like 1 percentile.
Could you explain for listeners what working memory is and what kind of low working memory looks like?
Yeah, so for example, I can't hold things in my head. So like if you tell me, Hannah, go out and take the trash out and it's the green bin, right, you've done 2 loaded questions, so I'm not going to remember one of those. Or I'll step out the door and then go, wait, which bin? Green, Hannah. Oh, okay. Step out this side. Oh God, forgot again. Go back in and out. What bin? So I can be like, wait, like just very forgetful, though people don't notice normally because I have loads of strategies. But like in terms of what it looks like, that's like very hard to describe.
Yeah, I think that summarises
yeah.
it quite
Yeah.
nicely. I wondered how your neurodiversity has kind of influenced your educational journey. So we were chatting a bit about before we started recording, but I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So after I was diagnosed, because obviously other discussions of other disorders were on the table and all of this, but in order to get me into a dyslexic school, which is what my parents wanted to prioritise, I didn't get a diagnosis of ASD and ADHD, just ADD. But later in university in year 1, my undergraduates, I was then diagnosed with them because...
Sorry, and for listeners, those
Yes.
are...
ASD is autism, obviously, which is impairments with like communication. It's also like sometimes I assume knowledge, which is what I did there. Don't worry, I do that with other people as well. Randomly start talking and they're like, what? You've missed out a couple of steps there, very important ones. Wow, I can't even think. ADHD, hyperactivity, and inattentiveness. I feel like all of them have just shown signs of the whole thing.
So how was those? So you obviously had some diagnosis
Yeah.
later on in your kind of primary or secondary school. You said you went to you went to a dyslexic school? Is that
Yeah, I went to a dyslexic specialist school. So halfway through primary, I got it for the government, so the government paid for it because my parents couldn't pay for it. But it did lead into a lot of debt for my mum and dad. And so then I finally got into a dyslexic school in like year 5. And then I probably started to properly read in year 7. And then I stayed in dyslexic school for quite a long time, obviously. And then I achieved more than I thought I would. More
Now
than
you
anyone
read so
thought I would.
much.
Yeah, I love reading now. Literally, I got to year 8 and it was like, you can't stop me now. I'm forever reading. I will read everything and anything. Yeah, and then I ended up going to A-levels, which, funny enough, my parents thought the educational side would be the hardest part. And I would say that's like in with university. With neurodiversity, you think that must be the part you struggle with because obviously you have ADHD, that means you can't concentrate on your work. Or you have, autism, so that means you can't work with colleagues very well. But actually it all came to the fact that like, no, socialisation is the hardest part. It's just like one of those things where like working memory, it's really easy if you had working memory and not autism, because you'd be able to go like, hey, so I don't know what that person looks like because I can't remember faces. Fun fact. Like I'm reasonably fine. Like I remember you guys' faces, but sometimes I generally like someone came up to me today and I'm so sorry to this person. I have no clue who they are.
What did they look like?
They had glasses. I think they were from the ASD lecture I did because I was a guest speaker for that. but I don't know if they were. They just came up like they were so familiar to me, and they were like, oh hi, are you coming from a lecture, you're just leaving? And I almost was like, just coming in. I don't know.
To be fair, I don't have face processing issues, but you just have to go with it, haven't you? When people come up to me, and I just go, yeah, that's great, good.
I just forget people so much. Like my dad says, like I always say this to my dad because it always happens in movies, and I'm like, if there's two average blonde-looking women in a movie,
so true, actually.
they're just exactly the same, and I'm just like, okay, I understand that they're two attractive blonde women, but other than that, they're the same person.
I get that. So this was your journey when you were little. Do you think your neurodiversity is affecting your educational journey now as a PhD student?
I mean, I think some ways, yes, because obviously it's still the social's big thing, and I'm not fully independent in other ways, right? So I still live at home, and my mum does help me with a lot of things, right? But in terms of the actual experience of a PhD or stuff like that, it's very similar. So because of all the support I've got in place, and with Saloni, she's very nice and she understands a lot of what I say, but she will have to treat me slightly differently. And she literally said to me, she was like, I didn't realise how many things that were unspoken and how many things I didn't realise how different it was. And that's really funny coming from a person who's worked with people with autism, worked with people with DLD. But then when you meet someone with it, it's oh, you start to realise small little things. She would say to me, Hannah, 5 minutes. Now what that means is shut up. Shut up, because we need to go in 5 minutes. Not what I thought was continue talking for 5 minutes. So she told me that, and I was like, right, that means shut up, got it, okay.
Oh. That's really interesting, actually. So Saloni's your supervisor.
Yeah.
And considering her research is on looking at different types of neurodiversity, that was kind of taken for granted, and I can imagine other PhD students that do have neurodiversity or are neurodiverse that do have different experiences because their supervisors don't have that knowledge.
Yeah, there's so many experiences where I've met so many people, even recently Kathy Manning came and we were talking and they were like, wow, your parents must be so much readers, were they, when you were a child? And I was like, no, not at all, they didn't really like reading. And they were like, did you have a TV? And it's because I said I kind of started to read in a way of trying to not be excluded from communication, because there's a lot of stuff we communicate through reading, in the sense of oh, here's a movie, but if you can't watch the movie, you would read the book. And very weird little things.
Right.
That's really interesting to think about how people who maybe don't have the same reading motivation that you do, who might be dyslexic and things like that, everything that's communicated with PhD students is in a written form. Apart from podcasts. So that is actually something really interesting to think about.
There's so many things. I was speaking with Kyle, who he's worked with people with ASD, and when I first met with him to discuss actually a PhD proposal, that was when I was in my third year in undergraduates, he was like, you use your hands a lot. I was like, what? And he was like, oh, you use your hands a lot. I saw that people with autism don't use their hands a lot normally. And I was like, that's actually fascinating, because if you read a different side of research with specifically girls with autism, or certain adults with autism, not all people obviously, is that we use our hands a lot more. Because it's sensory processing, isn't it? It's how to sensory seek without being inappropriate, obviously, because you can't have a fidgety toy all the time, so you use your hands.
That's so interesting.
Right now I'm just flailing my hands about.
She is. She definitely
it's
is.
The way I talk.
Although I didn't notice before she mentioned
No,
it.
now you've noticed it, that's what we're going to be looking at.
It does. It's nuts.
So going off of that, do you think there's something that they should be doing in higher education to make it more accessible?
I mean, I think it's with all these things, when we're talking about psychology students, right? I think a lot of people work with, and we learn about disorders, and we learn about children and all these things, but sometimes it's it's very funny when you're working on a PhD about reading and neurodiversity and stuff like that, but then you do stuff and you're like, there's so many unwritten rules. I think that's the biggest one, is even with a lot of things in the PhD, sometimes things are very not written and not spoke about, and you almost are expected to learn as you go. But some of us don't learn as quick as others, and it's like, oh, I don't want to hurt another person, or I don't want to upset my supervisor or someone like this. But you haven't told you an upfront, so it's like...
It's actually a good point.
So is that kind of looking at supervisor education as well? So kind of, because obviously, you know, even supervisors from other departments, like, you know, an English PhD student, a history PhD student, educating them to kind of not go in with these preconceived ideas about how things should be.
I think it also starts at the grassroots, and like undergraduates, for example, like we talked about like ASD and not having a guest speaker. So we're talking always about people without actually including people. And the problem with that is that it's so different from actually talking about dyslexia. Like, we all know what dyslexia is, right? You shouldn't be able to read. That's the stereotype, right? And like in books, like I'm a reader, and in books, when I read dyslexics who are in books, they're always people who can't read at all.
Percy Jackson.
That's one, and so many others. Like, and sometimes you're like, that's not the way dyslexia always is. Yes, there's so many people who are like that, and there's also people who can read but they don't want to read, and there's so many different types. But also, as you say, there might be an English literature PhD student who's working with supervisor. She has dyslexia, and she might make mistakes, right?
Absolutely.
But she can write, and she can do it, and someone might not understand, hang on, why are you not doing that, and why don't you make mistakes all the time? But it's like, when they're doing a back and forth like conversational email, I don't want to listen to my voice and like with that little like speaker, you know, the electronic one, and I don't want to do all these like crazy checks. I just want to talk to you, right? Where if I'm submitting a document and it's like not the first draft, because my drafts are really rough, even though Saloni's like, your rough draft is never rough, and I'm like, that's my rough draft because it includes loads of spelling mistakes, and it's like when spell check isn't on, God, she like goes through and she's like, yeah, I noticed there's a little mistake here, and I was like, spell check isn't on. I'm gonna have to copy and paste the whole thing into Word. But like, it's very small stuff like that, and I think someone who might understand but have the stereotype involved, and I think sometimes you almost like, you know, actually in university societies, you know, those code of conduct, that would be nice for the supervisor relationship.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know what is it like.
Code of conduct, it's like what you expect from each member of the society, what you expect from the people who are attending, what you expect from like everyone involved. So like,
it's like a bit of like rules, like
responsibilities, expectations, like I guess like stuff like that. So like, if you were a person who only wants to be contacted during hours, right, then you would specify that in just the little thing. Which that's not always the case, because Saloni says to me she contacts out of hours and she doesn't expect you to respond.
Having supervisor training delivered by people who are neurodiverse, or people who are neurodiverse, creating resources for supervisors so they can better support them and or kind of talk about it, would that work?
I think it's more down to actually, like, I think that's what we need to be doing, like at the grassroots, like with undergraduates and with training. But then I guess at the supervisory level, and when you're already like right now, I would say is that allow neurodiversity to be open communication, right? Like, I struggle with this, and even like people who don't have any diagnoses, we're all a bit we all have our things where we like, hey, I really don't understand what you mean here, can you explain to me? But you feel like this thing of not being able to do that, and like, I'm very lucky Saloni understands me, and I'll be like to her, I'm very open about stuff, you know, I've never not like, I'll just randomly say like, I'm dyslexic when I make a mistake, but like other people aren't. And I think that's where, like, I guess the PhD advisors come in. But I guess, like, maybe for certain... Advisors,
for people who might have different terminologies at university, it's kind of a impartial person as part of your PhD team. So can kind of separate from your supervisors that can give advice and
But
support.
You go to not for your actual PhD research, but more for, like, general life.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, before, like, your first meeting, not even first meeting, maybe, like, during, like, the introductory week, you should meet with that person and your PhD supervisor, talk about like expectations, like code of conduct, but in a meeting. You know, like, hey, I communicate this way, I don't do it out of hours, is there any questions, or like what do you expect from me?
Yeah. Or if people struggle like keeping up to date with emails, like maybe, you know, speaking with supervisors and being like, you know, as part of that introductory meeting, you know, I'm not very good at reading really long, massive emails. Is it better to condense it into, you know, a short meeting or something if you can communicate better that way?
And I've always been like, I always say like, being open is always best. Like I've openly said to like Saloni, I'll be like, oh, by the way, I'm taking medication for depression, right? And it's like, I don't think any of those things should impact anyone. But if they are, I would say like impartial people are great. For the standpoint of like, sometimes people don't understand what you mean, but it's like, hey, just in case I might just have a mental dip, ain't about you, because I do want to do this, but it's like sometimes we can't control anxiety and we can't control depression, and sometimes neurotransmitters decide to opt out. They're like, I'm on a tea break today, how fun.
As a last nice question, what do you think is a top tip for helping other neurodivergent individuals in embarking in their PhD journey?
Yeah, I guess it really depends what stage of life you are at, but like I would say for undergraduates, because I know that's when like some people are looking, or like master students, I would say it's okay to be open, right? And if people do discriminate with you, it's also okay to report them. And I know it feels awful and you're like, they may blacklist me. They won't. Like, if they're actually that horrible, trust me, they'll be like grateful. Not them, but other people will be grateful, like, because like I think at certain times when you get to a point where like if you are not doing psychology, I think psychology is so easy to be open. Like, go for it, do it, because actually that can actually be a reason you are more likely to get offered it, which is crazy, but it's the truth. But if you're doing like English lit or chemistry or something, and it does feel like something that's more of an obstacle, I would say you don't have to actually disclose it straight away when you're applying. You can disclose it afterwards to your team and everything, but I would say always be open to your supervisor if you can. And if they don't seem to understand it, then I would say talk to someone and try to get them to understand, but be very understanding that they may not understand it, because it's very hard. I would say like a lot of people like just don't know your shoes, like, and if they are rude, then you report. Like I would say like now it's a time, like I don't even mean rude as in like rude, but if they're like very condescending or something feels very off, you should do it, because it's not worth it for anyone. And I always think about another person who will come in who might be, you know, in that position, and if that happens to them, are they going to be on stable ground, are they not? And you know, I really think that's more important nowadays.
Great advice.
Absolutely. Just to finish off, are you on Twitter, or X as we call it now? Are you
do you want people to follow you?
Do you want people to follow you?
To be fair, I don't have any social media. That's a weird autism/anxiety thing.
Absolutely.
Don't follow Hannah anywhere.
If you want to find Hannah, well, you
don't.
can't.
No, I have a pure profile on Royal Holloway.
Google
profile. Hannah Jones, Royal
Holloway, and you can check out her pure profile. There we go.
Yeah, and my email's on there.
And we'll link it in the thing.
Yeah.
But it's so lovely to have you on, Hannah. Thank you for being our first guinea pig guest.
I am a guinea pig.
You are a guinea pig. But yeah, thanks so much.
I wish I was a dog.
Not a guinea pig.
Not a guinea pig, even though they are adorable.
Brain Bite! Woohoo! What's the topic this week?
Well, it's actually come from a TikTok trend, and it's, does caffeine consumption work as a treatment for ADHD symptoms?
So it kind of feeds on from what we were talking about with Hannah today about neurodiversity. So yeah, I've seen this on TikTok loads.
Yeah.
Everyone's saying, oh yeah, when I have caffeine, when I have coffee, it actually like makes me
like more relaxed,
more relaxed but focused, not hyperactive and things like that. And as a researcher, I was thinking, is this true?
Or is it just a trend?
Well, we had a look at the research, didn't we, Gaia?
Yes. So, excuse me for the pronunciation, but VasQuest 2022 actually looked at this, and they did find that caffeine treatment increases attention and improves learning in ADHD. But they were only looking at animal studies,
and the results are quite contradictory. And there's actually no support on reducing hyperactivity symptoms. It's only looking at increased attention and improves learning. So take from that what you will.
Yeah.
But don't believe everything you read online or see online, because it doesn't look like it's proper treatment. And obviously, just a disclaimer, if you do have ADHD, please go and see your doctor and
after this, don't be like, oh, I'm going to drink 3 coffees right now and then be super focused. You might die.
Please don't do that. Obviously, follow your medical advice that you've been given, but we were just trying to have a look.
Yeah, again, not that kind of doctor.
We are not that kind of doctor.
Oh, so good.
Anyway, it was great to record another episode.
Yeah.
That's it for us today.
Chat to you next week.
Don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully you've listened to all 4 of our episodes. So yeah, subscribe and review. Give us a 5-star review, because these episodes are lovely, of course.
Our trailer came out yesterday, so exciting.
Yes. Obviously, thank you so much to the Doctoral School for supporting this podcast. Where can people find us on social media, Gaia?
At @otherdoctor_pod.
That's it, on Twitter and Instagram. And you can look at our lovely website and for full transcriptions at www.theotherkindofdoctor.wordpress.com. Thanks.
Hey,
bye.